Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Tuesday, which kind of officially kicks off game week. We've broken down the previous game, and we're now looking ahead to the next opponent. And that's going to be a big topic of conversation today. I'm Brian Driscoll. That's Trevor Trowbridge right there. Y'all know who that is. And today, Trev, we've got several things we're going to discuss. We're going to kick the show off here in a few. Sort of looking at what's at stake for Notre Dame in this game against Virginia. And when you're playing a team like Virginia, who's a scrappy, decent team, they're 5-4, coming off of a big win. They beat a top 25 Pitt team last week at Pitt. As you mentioned, I believe in your article, you talked about how they're 3-1 on the road, right? And this is a scrappy team, but it's not a team that should beat Notre Dame. And so the focus is going to be on, what does Notre Dame have to prove? What can Notre Dame do? So we'll talk about that at the beginning of the show. Segment 2 of today's show, we'll actually take a dive into Virginia. We'll look at their offense, their defense, what we like about it, what things Notre Dame should be able to take advantage of. And then part 3 of today's show is going to take a look at tonight's college football playoff rankings, Trevor. And obviously those come out this evening around 8:30. We're going to go live at 8:30 is our plan. Most likely the show won't start on time. Not our show. I'm referring to the college football playoff show won't start right at 8:30 because it's in between 2 basketball games, and usually those run a little bit long. We will, if it's looking like the game is going to finish early, we will start early and kind of get going, and we'll preview things a little bit, and then we'll give you guys a live reaction to all the rankings, and then, of course, after we give that live reaction to all the rankings, we'll then break down what it means for Notre Dame. So that's what's kind of on the docket today with us here on the big show. So Trevor, boy, I tell you what, man, this Notre Dame team keeps playing red hot football. I'm excited to talk about this team, and we're going to find out if they can keep it rolling. And as we look at this game, it's a game that Notre Dame should win convincingly, and it's certainly a game that when you look at the betting lines, Notre Dame's a 23-point favorite. So the expectation is that Notre Dame is going to win big, which I think is perfect timing for us to talk about our friend of the show, MyBookie.
It sure is, Brian. Notre Dame has been red hot lately, which has been awesome for me because I've been using MyBookie to bet on Notre Dame's alternate spread, which has actually hit over the past couple of weeks, which has been a lot of fun. So unfortunately for me, I have already used up my bonus bet, which I got from my deposit bonus. But for any of you who are wondering how to do that, when you sign up for MyBookie, all you have to do is type in promo code IRISH, IRISH. And what that's going to do for you is it's going to double your deposit bonus. So, for an example, if you put in $10, MyBookie is going to then reward you with $10 worth of bonus bets, so on and so forth. I believe that there is a cap to that number. I'm not 100% sure what that is, but I don't know if you put in $1,000. I don't know if they're going to double your deposit up to that much. However, just signing up to play, they are already going to reward you for signing up with MyBookie. It's one of the best sports books out there. It gives you the tools that you need to win. They also allow you to enroll in their loyalty rewards program, which is going to help you earn extra cash just for throwing down some bets, which is something that I've already reaped the benefits of. This Thursday, there's going to be another Thursday night football game coming up, which me and one of my buddies always link up to watch on Thursdays, and there's no better way to do that than with MyBookie risk-free Thursdays. So they have a lot going on over at MyBookie. Be sure to check them out. They're the sports book that gives you control and rewards you for every moment of play.
So Trevor, before we start, I did want to make up for something we did not do last night. So last night, we were so excited about the show last night. Just breaking down the Notre Dame. Gosh, the biggest game of my childhood was the Florida State game. Like, I remember the Miami game in 88, and I was 10. That was kind of my first year as a Notre Dame fan, and that was obviously a big game. But, like, when I was old enough to really appreciate it was the 93 season when they went 12-1 and beat Florida State. And so I've always had, as I've said this before, I've always had a lot of respect for Florida State. I grew up with Florida State as a kid, Trevor. In my life, there's like 15 plus years in a row where Florida State finished in the top 5 every single year, And so there's a lot of respect there. So to watch Notre Dame beat them 52-3, and like I know they're down, but it's still Florida State. So I enjoyed that. And then, of course, during the show, Nolan James commits to Notre Dame. We broke all that down, and I dropped the ball Trevor. I dropped the ball. There were 4 super chats that we did not get to, but what I did is I did screenshot those 4 chats, and we are going to, you and I are just going to quickly address them here and bring them up before we get started. And again, I apologize to Joe and Tyler and Cody Shreve because we did not get to those super chats last night, but we are going to get to them because you guys did give us those super chats. We greatly appreciate it, and I don't want you guys to feel like we don't value those, and so I do feel bad about that. Cody Shreve with a super chat said, "Happy Veterans Day." Of course, yesterday was Veterans Day, and again, we really thank all of you who have the courage and the desire and the passion and the patriotism and the concern for fellow man to serve in all capacities in which service is given. I come from a military family. My wife used to be a firefighter. So, grandfather was a police officer. My uncle was a police officer. My mom's side was in the Marines. My grandfather fought in World War II in the Battle of the Bulge, actually, which I did not find out till after he passed away because he did not like to talk about it. But we love all y'all veterans, and we appreciate y'all. And I know we have a lot of you guys in our chat, and so we greatly appreciate that you guys are part of this community. And just know that you are appreciated, valued, and respected by us here at Irish Breakdown. So thank you again for that reminder, Cody. Joe Papiti with 2 super chats. First one from Joe is, "Go Irish, love beating Florida State. My take, A, offense still hasn't played their best game. And B, Al Golden is having the best years of DC, in my opinion." Thoughts? Well, I'll tell you, I'll go backwards, Trev. There's no doubt Al Golden is the best coordinator in college football right now. I mean, when you consider where Notre Dame ranks defensively in just about every major category, somebody on our board today, PQ Whatado, put a stat up about stop rate, and talked about how it was from Max Olson from ESPN put this together. And Notre Dame has the number 2 stop rate in all of college football behind only Ohio State, and they are right behind Ohio State. Put it like this: they're closer to Ohio State than they are to number 3 Tennessee. So they're 0.4 ahead of Tennessee. They're 0.1 behind Ohio State when it comes to stop rate. They're also number 2 in points per drive. They're giving up less than 1 point per drive. You look at you look at the other metrics. The Fermo efficiency index last week. I don't know if they've updated. Let me see if they've updated. Yeah, they've updated their stuff. They have Notre Dame as the number 5 defense in all of college football. You've got the football power index. When you look at their efficiency numbers, they have Notre Dame's defense ranked. Let's see here. They have Notre Dame ranked number 3 overall. So all of the computers obviously really like Notre Dame a lot. But then there's also the raw data, Trev. And it's not just like, oh, they're doing good relative to their competition. That's also true. That's where the efficiency comes from. But they also rank number 3 in all of college football in points per game at 11.1. Only Ohio State and Army rank higher. You look at them in total defense, they rank 7th in total defense this year, giving up 274.6 yards per game. And as is always the case, half of the teams ahead of them are Big Ten teams because the Big Ten has no offense to speak of in their league. And that's why you always have all these teams. They're 4th in college football in yards per play, behind Tennessee, Indiana, and Texas, ahead of Ohio State. And, of course, their pass defense, Trevor, this year has once again been outstanding. They're 2nd in yards per game. They're 2nd in quarterback rating. They've had twice as many interceptions this year as they've allowed touchdowns. They're 4th in fewest yards allowed per attempt. And for the second straight year, or potentially for the second straight year, they could be a top 2 team in completion percentage. Last year, they were number 2 behind Florida State. This year, they're number 1. They've actually taken off 5%. They were number 2 last year, Trevin. So far, they've taken off 5 percentage points, about 4.6 percentage points off of even where they were last year, and lead college football at 47.8 completion rate. So just been an elite defense, and they've done it without Benjamin Morrison since the Stanford game. They've done it without Jordan Patelho since game 3. They've done it without Boubacar Traore since game 5. They didn't have Gabriel Rubio for half of their games so far this season. He comes back, and they lose Jason Onye, who had played really good football, and they're young. Notre Dame right now going into this Florida State game. See, they had Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, Don Schuler, Drake Bowen. So they had 4 true sophomores freshmen or sophomore starting. Plus, they play a ton of Jaden Osbury. They play a ton of Kingston Viliama-Asa. And Bryce Young didn't start, but Bryce Young for the last 2 games has played more snaps than the starting defensive end. At least the last 2 games, I believe, against traditional teams. I don't remember if he did against Navy, but he certainly did against Florida State and Georgia Tech. So and your starting Viper and his backup are redshirt sophomores, and Josh Burnham and Junior Chuelemaka. And then, of course, your defensive tackle who comes off the bench when Howard Cross goes down last week. He's a redshirt sophomore. So just a tremendous job by Al Golden this year, Trevor. Just exceptional.
Rarely ever do you see a team get younger and lose the players that they had through graduation and the draft, transfer portal, et cetera, et cetera. Rarely ever do you see them get younger, lose some of their anchoring pieces due to injury, and get better. And on paper, that's exactly what Notre Dame's defense has done. So, Joe, I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is far and away Al Golden's best job as a defensive coordinator, which leaves room for a lot of excitement for what's going to come down the road for years and years and years, ideally, right? So it's a testament to coaching. It's a testament to recruiting and what it means to really bring in top-level talent to Notre Dame. Because if you would have told me at the start of the season that Notre Dame was going to lose Ben Morrison at one point, be without Gabe Rubio and Josh Burnham for a point of time, lose Jordan Botello, lose Boubacar Traore, Jaden Mickey was going to leave the team, a true freshman would be starting at corner. And you told me all of that. And after all of those things happen, on paper, they get better. I would have asked, what are you smoking? You know what I mean? Like what's going on up there? But that's the reality that we live in, which is really, really exciting. So, Joe, I couldn't agree with you more.
I'm going to have to look this up to see if this has happened in recent history. But do you know that Notre Dame has held 3 of their last 4 opponents to less than 100 yards passing? That's nuts.
I know that now. Goodness gracious.
That's nuts. Now, of course, one of them was an option team, sure. But Stanford's not, and Florida State's not. That's really, really impressive. Really, really impressive. But the first part, the offense is yet to play its best game. I agree with that. I mean, even go back to the 66-point game against Purdue. I mean, you had some easy misses from Riley, some missed reads, some missed opportunities. Anthony Knapp getting launched into his chest when he's about to throw a touchdown pass. And they could have absolutely played better that game. They could have played a lot better against Florida State. They could have played a lot better against Georgia Tech. The Army game, the Navy game, you could look at and say, yeah, they could have played better, but that was a really good performance against Army, like Navy. Like that to me is still probably their best performance of the season. I would argue, especially when you consider the possession time and the lack of possessions in that game. Even with Army turning the ball over, it's still one of those games where you had the ball once in the third quarter, and that's it. So you're not going to run a ton of plays in that particular game, and to go out there and still score over 50 points and have the efficiency they had and those type of things, it's been impressive. I mean, look, first 5 games of the year, the offense was only over 6 yards. Actually, they only went over 7 yards per play once. That was against Purdue. In the last 4 games, they've gone over 7 yards per play 3 of their 4 games. So they're getting there. They're getting there. They're becoming a more efficient team. And Joe's right. They have not played their best game. I don't know that they've necessarily played really close to that at this point in time. Now, they may not play to their full potential. There may just be too many injuries, Trevor. There just may be too much going on for them to be what they could have been. But, boy, I tell you what, man, for all the issues we're talking about in the beginning of the season, you remember at one point in time in the season, Trevor, Notre Dame had played 4 games and had only scored over 30 points once in 4 games. And now you look at this football team and you look at their offense and you're like, does Notre Dame seriously rank 12th in college football in scoring offense, 0.3 behind Ohio State and 0.6 behind Texas? Do they really? And you're like, yeah, they do. They're number 12 scoring offense in college football, and scoring team in college football at 38.3 points per game. When you think about where that was at the beginning of the year, you're like, I would not have. Like, if I'd have told you after the Miami Ohio game, hey, Trevor, Notre Dame's going to is going to average about 40 yard points a game this year at the end of the year, you'd be like, okay, Brian, listen, when you hired me, you told me we were not going to be homer site. You said we're going to give honest opinions and we're not going to be pro Notre Dame. We're not going to be homers. And I'd be like, yeah, you're right. You're right. But now look at them. This is kind of where we are. And the offense hasn't quite got as to the level where they're as good as I think they can be. Even with all the injuries, I still don't think they're as good as they they can be.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing that leaves room for a lot of excitement, and I talked about this on the postgame show, is maybe this is the Notre Dame offense that we see for the rest of the season. Right. And on one hand, it's like, yeah, but they're kind of leaving a little bit of meat on the bone there, right? But then on the other hand, you go and you look at the amount of points that they're putting up week in and week out. And it's like, well, I mean, if this is the Notre Dame offense the rest of the season, yeah, there's going to be some frustrating drives in there. And then there's also going to be spurts of who can stop this offense. What defense is out there right now that has proven they can game plan for how many different ways that this offense can hurt you. So I'm interested to see what it's going to look like down the home stretch here. But Notre Dame hasn't played their best game. I don't think they're far off once you factor in the injuries and the lack of experience at some positions. You have some guys in and out of the lineup. So, but again, if Notre Dame's not a game performance is hanging 45 points on another Power 4 team,
right. I mean, they played really sloppy football and beat Georgia Tech 31-13. They played really sloppy. They played some sloppy football a little bit early at Stanford, won 49-7. It's like and this is what kind of hit me last night is like, dude, they haven't peaked yet. They're getting a lot closer to peaking, a lot closer. But they're not there quite yet. And this weekend's game is going to be a great chance for them to get there when we see them play Virginia. Another one from Joe Papiti. Thank you, Joe. Here's something. I can't even think how ND lost to Northern Illinois. This is a totally different team. The coaches also seem totally driven. I think I hope that Notre Dame never forgets that Northern Illinois game. I think the media, Trevor, is obsessing on it way too much. Like, way too much. Like, I saw some nonsense from Andrea Adelson at ESPN that kind of pissed me off. And I don't often get pissed off at ESPN because I just assume they're going to write stupid things. But she's justifying dropping Notre Dame down to 11 in their power rankings from last week. Beat Florida State 52-3. And the whole thing, she talked about the Northern Illinois game. Riley Leonard threw 2 interceptions, and he only has 9 touchdown passes. And I'm like, are we here again? We're just going to pretend like rushing touchdowns, of which he has 13, don't count. Like, that's really where we are again. And why are we still talking about a game that happened 2 months ago? You know what I mean? Like, if that's all you're doing and you're not recognizing what this Notre Dame football team has been the last 2 months since that game, then you've got an agenda. And you're ignoring your own computer rankings because their own computer rankings have Notre Dame much higher than that. The FPI, I believe, has Notre Dame. I'm going to pull it up here real quick, Trevor, but I think the FPI has Notre Dame 4th or 5th. I'm going to pull it up here real fast. Let me go to the FPI. Football Power Index has Notre Dame as the number 4 team in the country, behind Alabama, Texas, and Ohio State. Right? I mean, so I don't know what else you expect Notre Dame to do. I mean, what's the S&P Plus? I'm curious. SP Plus, whatever that guy's stuff is. I'm gonna go. Here we go. SP Plus, which is usually very anti Notre Dame because they don't play SEC teams. They have them 7th, ahead of Penn State, ahead of Tennessee, ahead of Miami, ahead of Indiana. And it's always filled with Big Ten, SEC, Big Ten, SEC, SEC, Notre Dame, Big Ten, SEC, and then an ACC team at 10. Right? And by the way, he still has Ohio State ahead of it. Like, the SP Plus one year had Clemson and Ohio State at the end of the year ahead of LSU. That year happened to be 2019. So after the postseason, LSU was not the number 1 ranked team, even though so even that thing, which is a huge homer, it's not homer. That's not the right word. The algorithm is clearly slanted heavily towards the SEC and the Big Ten. Even in that, Notre Dame is 7th. And yet in the ESPN power ratings, which are human produced because it's not any kind of algorithm or anything like that, they continue to fall and drop to 11. Even the AP and coaches have Notre Dame, realize that Notre Dame is really good. So those are kind of the things that I look at, Trev, and say that this team is getting viewed incorrectly. We'll see how the committee views it tonight, but that's all fine. But when it comes to Notre Dame, that's the one group that I do want to still continue to focus on Northern Illinois game, because I want them to have that chip on their shoulder. I don't want them to lose that we need to show up and play at a certain standard mentality. Like, I don't want them to have a we've arrived moment. I want them to stay hungry. And I hope that continues all season. I really do.
Yeah, one thing that I've really appreciated from Marcus Freeman is he's talked a lot about preparing mentally and physically. And he got asked on Monday, why have you had so much success in the second half? And all of his answers all allude back to we've seen what it's like when we're not able to handle success. He said that, going up and continuing to run their offense and having a lot of success in second half blowouts of teams is a byproduct of learning from the mistake of not handling success well. You see college football teams blow major league leads every single week, right? And so some of that is just a byproduct of not being able to handle success well. Around mental and physical preparation, he talks ad nauseum around, we've seen what it's like. We know what it feels like to not, you know what I mean? So that I can appreciate. Internally, I want Notre Dame to always have Northern Illinois at the maybe not the forefront of their mind, but always there, right? Always there is that constant reminder that, hey, if you don't prepare like a champion, if you don't practice like a champion, if you don't come in with that mindset, then a team can beat you. One thing that I think that's funny is the Northern Illinois loss is weighing heavier on Notre Dame now than it was in the Purdue week, because now all of these other top teams are losing, and there has to be some justification that there can't be any rational thought around Notre Dame as becoming a better team. It has to be something. You just watch Georgia lose again in very convincing fashion in a game where they looked terrible. I don't care who you are. You lose by 18 points. There's no close, there's no miss, you got dominated, right? All of these teams continue. Miami loses, they're the ACC's crown jewel, and they have
to a
Cam
team that Notre
Ward.
Dame beat by 18 points, by the way. I just want to make sure that we remind people of that.
Oh, yeah, but hey, Miami would have beat Northern Illinois, Brian, so it's not like it matters. Like, all things break even.
Maybe.
I know.
Maybe.
I know. And that's the argument that's always going to be around Notre Dame until they go and win their first playoff game. And even then, I'm sure there's still going to be some people around. Oh, you remember what happened on September 7th, though? We remember. We know what happened. So, look, at the end of the day, that conversation is going to be what it is. There's just national media people that need to have that one thing about Notre Dame that they feel better about saying, because there's some people out there that just can't accept when Notre Dame's a good football team. We've said it here all the time. What speaks more about a team? One loss early in the season or what you've done 7 games in a row? I'm willing to err more on the side of 7 games in a row, as I'm sure most of you are. But the Northern Illinois storyline, it's getting exhausted at this point.
There was something that I was having it was a good discussion. I'll call it a discussion, not a debate, with somebody on I think it was on Twitter. And he's a former coach, and he said when he's evaluating teams, he always takes out their best performance and their worst performance and find the median. And I said, I don't agree with that. I think you need to view those things, because you need to make sure that you don't do the things that lead to you playing like you did in your worst performance. And you need to always be striving for repeating what your best performance was. And so that's kind of the way I look at it. I think his argument was more from a sort of like a statistical type of evaluation, But the thing that a lot of people do that, and if you take his point out and you say, okay, let's evaluate his point of view. If you take away Notre Dame's best performance against Purdue, which a lot of people say, well, yeah, it's inflated by Purdue, and you take away the Northern Illinois game away from Notre Dame's season production, and that's when you realize, like, this team is really freaking good. Like that's the thing that kind of frustrates me a little bit, Trevor, is that people aren't willing to do that. I mean, if you take away those 2 games, Notre Dame's averaging 37.9 points per game. If you take those two games away and you look at Notre Dame's numbers, their defense is giving up 11 points per game. The numbers they have now, that's who they are. Because they have that one really huge blowout game, and then they have that one really bad game. And if you take those 2 things away, their numbers are identical. This is who they are. They've reached that. Like, that's why I say don't necessarily take those 2 things away, because those things are included. But even if you do, you'll see what this football team is. Okay, so outside of their best day and their worst day, Notre Dame has beaten Texas A&M, a ranked team, on the road by 10. They've beaten Miami of Ohio in a sloppy game by 25. They beat a ranked Louisville team by a touchdown in a game they led for over 52 minutes. They beat Stanford by 42. They beat Georgia Tech on a neutral field in Atlanta, in Georgia Tech's hometown, by 18 in a game where Georgia Tech scored last in the last minute to even make it that. They went and played Navy on a neutral field, beat them by 37 in the game. They were ranked in the top 25, and then just beat Florida State by 49. So this is a really good football team. And that kind of leads into, to the what's at stake for Notre Dame in this game against Virginia, Trevor. And it's that right there. It's keep building. That's really key number one when you talk about what's at stake for this Notre Dame team against Virginia. It's you have developed into a dominant football team. And that was the point of the article I wrote yesterday, Trevor, was Notre Dame isn't just like, and dominance isn't like I said this last night, I believe, Trevor, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. A friend of mine asked me, I had said, this is the most dominant Notre Dame team I've seen in a long time. And my point was, I think they've arrived as a dominant team. Now, dominant team doesn't mean you're a championship team, right? And I'll reiterate that again. Championship and dominance are two different things. Dominance leads to then eventually getting to being a championship team, but you don't have to be a championship team to be a dominant team. And so like all those years, Florida State was a top 5 team and never won a title. They were still dominant. They just couldn't get over that hump of winning a title. Then they finally did, and the results were still kind of the same. They were just able to kind of take that next step. But when I look at it, Trevor, this is a dominant team, meaning they don't have to play they've played their B- C+ games and throttled people. We talked about this at the time. We all, during the post-game show, I believe, was it the Georgia Tech game, or did Vince and I talk about it upon further review? But I believe you guys all said, I could be wrong, well, how would you grade this performance? And I gave it a C+ against Georgia Tech. And they beat them by 18 points on the road in a game that wasn't really close from the second quarter on. Or at least it was somewhat close, but it was never a game you thought they were going to lose. And like that, we've seen what kind of team they are. They're a 6-4 team with losses to Notre Dame, losses to Louisville, losses to SMU. That's and a loss to a 6-2 Syracuse team, right? And so you realize, like, boy, that's a pretty good football team right there. That's a really good football team. I'm sorry, they didn't lose to SMU; they lost to Virginia Tech. But like that's when you've arrived, when you don't have to play your A game. I mean, we saw in 2021, Notre Dame goes 11-1, but when they play their C+ B- game, they barely beat a bad Florida State team. They needed overtime to do that. They barely beat a 7-6 MAC team in Toledo, and Notre Dame wasn't that team earlier in the year, but they are now. And that's an impressive thing. But now you got to build on it, Trevor. That's the first thing that's at stake is you no steps back. What I love about what Notre Dame has done is, for the most part, they've been on a upward trajectory for 2 months. You can't have any steps back now. And so now it's about, okay, take that next step, build on it. You've got another good quality football team, better than the team you played last week. Now go out there and put together another strong, dominant performance and build on what you've done as you get into this final 2-game stretch, which is going to define your season.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame has been dominant enough. Like, look, at the end of the day, we're fans, right? Like, we will break down the show, or we'll break down the team, we'll break down the games, and provide in-depth analysis. But also, Brian, at the end of the day, we're both fans. We still want Notre Dame to win. We still watch the games with a little bit of that fan mentality of like, this is still my team. I still want them to win. And where I've noticed the shift in Notre Dame this year in them making that transition to becoming a dominant team is I'm watching these games with, I mean, not for a lack of sounding cocky here, but I watch these games and I've never been scared that they're going to lose them. Like I'm sitting back and I'm watching these, and yeah, things aren't going the right way, but it hasn't felt like it's felt in the past of like, oh gosh, like this didn't go our way. The mistakes are going to start compounding. The team's going to give up. If they win, it's going to be 19-12. But I mean, it's just, now I'm not saying that Notre Dame has played perfect, but they have played in a way where at the end of the day, it just ends up not being a close game. Even their close games don't feel like they're close games. That's a good mark of a dominant team, like the Louisville game. Yeah, it was 31-24, the final score. It felt like it was not that close, So yeah. I agree. Notre Dame needs to continue on this uptick, and we're watching a team improve right before our eyes. I said it in the post-game show that, at the beginning of the season, if Riley Leonard wasn't going to have a good game, that didn't result in 285 total yards of offense, 3 touchdowns, no turnovers. That's not what that was.
Well, they weren't scoring 50 points against anybody early in the season if Riley Leonard didn't play well. And he didn't play well against Florida State. I think he would probably tell you that. He made some plays, but he didn't play well. A lot of missed reads, inaccurate throws. He didn't play well, and they hung 52 on that team. And that's got to be good for Riley. Like, that's got to be comfort. Part of me wonders if that Florida State game was like, did you watch him in the interview after the game? So I don't watch the broadcast. I went, you know that. And I was put it on last night, and I was just kind of having it on his background. I wasn't listening to it. And it was at the end of the game. And I looked over, and he's being interviewed by, I think it was Catherine Tappan, and he looked giddy. And then I turned the sound up, and I'm like, this kid's like giddy right now. And I wonder if this game was an aha moment for him, which is, dude, I didn't play very well at all. And we just destroyed a team that I know how good this team is because we faced this team last year in Tallahassee. And that, hey, I don't have to carry this team like I have, like I thought I did, and like I had to do at Duke. I wonder if that kind of maybe is that final thing he needs to just like, dude, just calm down and play ball. Just relax and play ball. Trust your dudes. You're throwing tunnel screens to Jaden Greathouse and he's turning them into 20-yard gains. Like, you're going to be fine. You don't need to carry this team. And that's kind of what we've seen. And I wonder if that, because that leads into the second thing that there is at stake in this matchup, Trevor, which is Notre Dame needs to take another step offensively. And that's the part of the team that where you can see the biggest jump. Like, for the defense, Trevor, it's just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, if you keep doing what you're doing, you can play with anybody. I have no doubt about that. You can play with anybody. Just keep doing what you're doing. Stay healthy. Keep doing what you're doing. The offense is to one that says, hey, you still can and need to get better. And we saw that against Florida State. They big played Florida State. They out-talented Florida State. They had a lot of missed opportunities. And the two videos, I'm going to do just a quick run game breakdown, breaking down the touchdown run and a couple of the big runs and just a couple of things they did. It wasn't a real creative run game and some of the mistakes. But the pass game video, I'm going to focus on some of the missed opportunities that they had in that game. And not in a, gosh, Riley, you got it. But it's just like, look, this is just things where you got to get better because those are correctable things. And you're going to be like, wow, like, could you imagine what this offense would have looked like if he would have made a couple of those throws that we've seen him make in the last month? And that's the thing. And it's like, man, boy, this offense, if you can become more efficient, like consistently more efficient, this offense is going to go nuts in these final three games, Trevor. Like, absolutely nuts in these final three games because the big playability's always been there. But they were sub 50% in run game efficiency against Florida State. That's not good. You want to be around 60. They were over 70 against Navy. Sub 50 is not a good performance, especially against a team that's not very good. You got to get better there. Riley was sub 50, just over 50% throwing the football. For much of the game, he was like he's like 9 of 20 at one point in time. He had a couple, screens late that he hit and a couple balls late that he hit to get him over 50%, but he was off target. He was off target all game. He wasn't making great decisions. That created some of that inefficiency. And then when he did make some good throws, you had drops. You had a drop by Jeremiah Love. You had a drop by Jordan Faison. You had one of his incompletions was the play to Mitchell Evans that I still think was a catch, but he put the ball where it needed to be. So even with all that, he still played better than 51.2, 51.4%. He still played better than that. But, you got to hit that quick post route to Jaden Greathouse that would have gone for a touchdown. You got to take that third down read in the red zone that probably leads to a touchdown. You got to make those throws. And that's the next step for this offense, Trevor. And that's what Virginia presents you an opportunity is. You've got to start becoming more efficient. This is a defense that requires you to be efficient to really get rolling against them. You can get some big plays against Virginia, but when teams get into trouble, Louisville got into trouble with this, Pitt got into trouble in this, is when if you're not efficient, they can do some things to get you off the field. And that's where this if Notre Dame's going to keep building, and Army's the same exact way. I talked about how good the Notre Dame defense is and where they rank in a lot of different categories. And if you look at it, Trevor, Army's right next to him. Notre Dame ranks number 3 in scoring defense. You know who's number 1? It's Army. Notre Dame ranks number 7 in total defense. You know who ranks number 6 right ahead of them? Army. Now, again, Notre Dame's played a lot better competition, but guys, this is a quality defense. And so you're going to have to really be on be at your best these next couple weeks to play, not to win. but to play to the level that you're capable of to make the statement you need to make. Like, you know, makes me think of this, Trevor. Somebody said something today, and it was about Notre Dame being a Joe Moore Award semifinalist. And somebody said, "Are we judging this offensive line too harshly?" I said, "No, we're not. They haven't played nearly as good as they need to play, even before the extra injuries came into play. I mean, you're only missing one starting offensive lineman against Northern Illinois." And I said, "But what's going on is the standard has changed. That's the difference. Marcus Freeman has changed. Brian Kelly changed the standard at Notre Dame, not in a good way. Yes, they won more, but he kept tamping down expectations to say, hey, 11-1 against a crap schedule is good enough. 10-2 against a crap schedule is good enough. Hey, look how great I am. Give me a pay raise. We won X number of games. And I'm like, yeah, how many of those teams were ranked? Very few, because your schedule was trash. And the standard was, okay, when a position group was weak, it could get you beat. The 2021 O-line, part of the reason Notre Dame played in a lot of close games is because how awful that offensive line was. You look at other years where the secondary was a major problem to where you're just like, you can't beat anybody good with that. The thing now is the issue with the offensive line isn't that they suck. They've had some moments where they struggled in the middle of the season, but it's more of they're being held to a different standard than what we held groups under under Brian Kelly, because now they're not championship worthy right now. It's not that they suck. It's that they're not where they need to be, which is playing at championship football. That's the standard now. The receiving corps does not suck at all. It's better than a lot of receiving corps that Notre Dame has had in recent years, but it's not championship caliber yet right now. And that's the new standard, and that's what Marcus Freeman has changed. And that ties into the point you made, Trevor, which is that standard means that you're not going into games being like, gee, I think they might get upset. And you always have to be concerned about them getting upset. We're not saying they can't get upset. We're not saying that at all. We're talking about our emotional feeling going into a game where it used to be just dread. Like any game was like, gee, they you know what I mean? They might do this. They might do that. It's more so, I just don't worry about it the way that I used to. It's certainly possible. We don't acknowledge that it's not possible. Notre Dame's not going to win their next 150 games without losing a game. They're going to lose games. But it's a different feeling now. And that's the standard where you talk about like the offensive line. Number one, I think part of this is built on numbers. They're a top 12 rushing team. They're a top 12 scoring team. They're a top 10 team in the country, and they're going to get some praise. The offensive line is going to get some praise for that. Ohio State's offensive line was also in there. I don't think they're very good. But that's the point, though, Trev, is Notre Dame's offensive line isn't like, I worry about them getting beat by Army because the offensive line is terrible. I worry about them losing to Virginia because the offensive – no, I don't know if they can beat, Texas because of that line. I don't know if they can beat Ohio State because of that line. That's the difference between what was and what is, and that's what shows that the standard is different, Trevor. But that also shows where Notre Dame has continued areas for needed growth over these final three games. That starts with Virginia.
Well, I think that's what's so exciting about this next stage of evaluation for Notre Dame. You and I have talked about it. I've talked about it a lot, that you can kind of break down Notre Dame's season in a vacuum into different stages of evaluation, right? Week one was an evaluation of how do you go into week one, a toxic environment that is just, it's one of the most crazy environments in all of college football against a ranked SEC team, and they passed that test, right? Then week two, it's how are you going to handle that success? And for all intents and purposes, they failed that test. So from Purdue until their bye week, it was, okay, what are you going to do to respond? And then during their first bye week, that 3-game stretch of Stanford, Georgia Tech, and Navy, it was okay. We've seen what we need to see. Notre Dame is starting to come back and putting that Northern Illinois loss further in the rearview mirror. So in this first set of bye week games, can they make the improvements that we thought that they could? And they have. They've passed that test now too. So now we've come at a really exciting point in the season where we're looking at these last 4 games past the previous test against Florida State coming out of their second bye, not by flying colors. The offense was sloppy, right? But they sloppily put up 45 points. So not passing by flying colors by any means, but now looking at this 4-game stretch, 10,000-foot view, big picture, is now it's time to start preparing yourself for the college football playoffs, which is a really exciting conversation to be in, because after the Northern Illinois game, we were not talking about the playoffs. We weren't talking about what does Notre Dame have to do to beat Texas? What does Notre Dame have to do to beat Georgia? What does Notre Dame have to do to beat Oregon? We were talking about what Notre Dame has to do to beat Purdue, right? So the transition from where Notre Dame was after September 7th to where they are now on November 12th is really, really, really exciting. So, yeah, Notre Dame has the opportunity on offense to go out there and clean some things up. But I think the name of the game for them is consistency, because they've also shown spurts where they can be an efficient offense. They've shown it in different quarters, different drives. But like I've said before, Notre Dame has to get rid of, once they get to the playoffs, that spurt of, hey, they have a really good first quarter and then they're kind of absent second quarter, midway through the third, and then they turn it back on again. Or they start slow in the first quarter and then they ramp it back up, second quarter and then, through the third. So I'm going to be looking for Notre Dame's offense to put together a complete game offensively, as far as being efficient, staying consistent, winning the easy, whatever, the layups, whatever you want to call it. That's what I'm going to be with.
I'll be honest. I'm okay if we only get a B-plus game the next 2 weeks if they save their "we've arrived" moment for Los Angeles. If they just give me a B game the next 2 weeks and just show some growth, and they don't have that A game until LA, I can live with that. I can live with that. But in all seriousness, we do need to see that development, that growth statement, because at the end of the day, Trevor, what's at stake for this game? I was winning, losing, all that. But this is another opportunity for you to make a statement, right? Like, why is Indiana ranked ahead of you right now? Well, because they don't have any losses, and that's fair. I mean, I personally would rank Notre Dame ahead of Indiana, but I'm not going to beef about Indiana being ahead of Notre Dame, because, no, Indiana has not played a tough schedule, but you know what? They've certainly played teams that are better than Northern Illinois, and they beat those teams. Notre Dame didn't, right? They played Florida International, who's not a very good football team, not as good as Northern Illinois, but they're not that far off, and they beat them, 31-7. They played Charlotte, who is, again, not as good as Northern Illinois, but they're in the same kind of ballpark, and they smacked them, right? And they've won the games. They've done what they needed to do, whereas Notre Dame hasn't. But the reason that Indiana gets so much love is because they're not just beating teams, but they're destroying teams. And the more that Notre Dame can continue to do that, the more that people are going to have sort of, you can't continue to hold on to that game. If Notre Dame dominates Virginia this weekend and beats Army convincingly next weekend, you're going to get to the point where and handles business against USC, and I'll have some data about how infrequently Notre Dame convincingly wins out in LA as we get closer to that game. But you got to continue doing what you're doing, which is convincingly beating people and giving teams worse losses. And against Virginia, that's going to be a challenge, because they do have a couple bad losses, Trev. I mean, they do. We can't ignore that. They have a couple games where, they just flat out got worked. And can Notre Dame beat them more convincingly than what North Carolina did a couple weeks ago when they beat them 41-14? That's going to be tough, and they've got a 14-point loss, a 4-point loss, a 17-point loss to Clemson in a game that was a lot like the Georgia Tech game, Trev, where it wasn't as close as the final score showed. Virginia, I think, scored like 21 points in the fourth quarter. So you're going to have some of those comp games where you kind of hold them up next to each other, and then of course North Carolina beat them 41-14 at their place. So those are going to be the things where, okay, this is another opportunity for you to go make a statement. And if you struggle at home against a team that would then drop to 5-5, and no one nationally respects Virginia. I think Tony Elliott's, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, I think he's done a heck of a job with this team this year, to be completely honest with you. But it's not a game that's going to move the needle because of who you beat. So it's going to have to move the needle because of how you beat them. And that's essentially where Notre Dame is, and they're going to need another game like that, to be honest with you, Trevor. And based on trends, Notre Dame is certainly capable of, as I mentioned, in their last 7 games, they have handed every single team they've beaten their worst loss of the season to date. Now, the only asterisk is with Louisville, it's tied. with SMU and Miami because they all beat them by a touchdown. But if you actually break the game down, Notre Dame is the only team that never trailed or was never tied with Louisville in the fourth quarter. Those other two teams were Notre Dame led convincingly the entire second half. And as soon as Louisville made it a one-score game, Notre Dame went right down the field and made it a two-score game again. You know what I mean? So it's really about making that statement, Trevor, and giving the committee that final statement of, hey, guys, I know we lost now almost 3 months ago because when the rankings come out, it'll have been 3 months since Notre Dame lost Northern Illinois. We're destroying people. That's who we are now. And that's what you need to base this off of. But they're waiting on you to fall back, right? Like that's the thing. They're waiting on you to have that 24-21 game against Virginia where they can say, see, that's who Notre Dame is. That's why we have them ranked where we have them. And unfortunately, it's kind of asking a lot of a team to just destroy people every week. But that's essentially what Notre Dame has to do, Trevor. And then the final piece, too, that we'll talk about, Trevor, is Notre Dame at one point in time until going into last season going into last year's Louisville game had a 30-game regular season win streak over the ACC. They lost that game and then lost another ACC game two ACC games later to Clemson. I want to see Notre Dame reestablish dominance in the ACC. And they have done a pretty good job of that, to be honest with you, here recently. Obviously, after losing to Notre Dame last season, or losing to Clemson last season, which was their second ACC loss in 3 games, they went out in their next ACC game and absolutely annihilated Wake Forest, 45-7. Come into this season, I do not count Stanford last year as an ACC game because they weren't in the ACC yet. They beat Louisville by a touchdown, so you beat a ranked ACC team. You beat Stanford by 42, beat a good Georgia Tech team on a neutral field. It was an away game that they chose to play on the neutral field by 18, and then, of course, you just beat Florida State by 49. So not only winning against the ACC, but a lot of those wins during that 30-game stretch were not competitive. And they need to get back to that and go out there and absolutely smash Virginia to make a statement to the rest of college football to say, hey, guys, this isn't just a hot streak. This is who we are. And this is why you need to respect us when it comes to the rankings. And this is why, as long as they keep handling business, Notre Dame needs to be playing at home that third weekend of December.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that gives me, a lot of confidence that Notre Dame can continue blowing out opponents the way that they have is they're not doing anything crazy. When's the last time you saw Riley Leonard take a snap deep in the fourth quarter? They're not keeping their starters on the field for the duration of all of these games to get to beating their opponents by 30. They're just running their offense. And then the second team comes in and just runs the offense. It's funny. I mean, out of their last 4 games, the game where they did pull out all the stops and run the fake punt and run a fake field goal, they scored the least amount of points in that game. All the other games, they were just running their offense. So, yeah, I agree. It is a tall ask, but I don't think that not you specifically, but nobody's asking Notre Dame to do anything that is even remotely close to beyond the realm of capabilities for them. It's literally just go out and play to your standard, which is, again, it goes back to that dominance conversation that you and I were talking about at the beginning of the show. And yeah, I mean, reestablishing dominance in the ACC is going to be imperative for Notre Dame. I mean, that 30-game win streak that they went on prior to the loss to Louisville last year was impressive. For all the people that say Notre Dame should go join a conference, okay, why? I mean, they are affiliated with a conference and are working them, so they don't have to. But besides the point, as long as Notre Dame continues to take care of business, I think everything else will just continue to fall into place.
So that's going to end segment 1 of our show today, Trevor. We're going to move on to a breakdown of Virginia next, folks. But do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Y'all know the drill. Hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And, of course, as always, make sure that you are signed up for our message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.